Hi everyone, Andrew Hopkins again. Just call me Drew, if you call me anything. I am going to be reviewing my second movie. I am reviewing the 1992 family comedy Beethoven. Made in 1992 by John Hughes under The Movie Begins, with with what appears to be a storm. It's dark out. We're seeing this warehouse that says Dandy Pup. It's obviously an abandoned warehouse, and these two guys come in, who we learn they're the actors Stanley Tucci, who plays Vernon, and Oliver Platt, who plays Harvey. And they are bringing in a cage with a dog in it, and there's a bunch of other dogs in cages all around them. And you see these scientific equipment, like you see heart monitors, you see like sensors on certain dogs, see syringes, and then Dean Jones comes out. We only see him as kind of a silhouette with in the background because of the light. We see Dean Jones, who plays Dr. Varnick, a vet, and he says to them, "I need puppies," and they both leave. And the next scene is at a pet store where we meet little puppy Beethoven. And he can't be more than 2-3 months old. He's very tiny fluffball. And all these people are looking at him. They're saying hi to all these other puppies. But nobody's adopting him because he is a St. Bernard puppy. So people are a little wary about that. One woman comes in wearing black leather on a motorcycle, and she asks the worker there, "I need a junkyard dog. How big do these guys get? Can they be mean?" And we hear they can be up to 150 to 200 pounds. And Beethoven, the puppy, pees on the girl in the leather jacket. And obviously she's not happy about that. So night comes, and the staff leaves, shut down for the night. Puppies are asleep in their little, not cages, their little pens with the wood chips in front of the window. And Vernon and Harvey show up in this really old, kind of a UPS van, but colored blue, really old. And they approach the door, and Vernon just breaks the glass like that, reaches in, pulls open the door as Harvey is saying, "What about the cameras? What about the cops? What about video surveillance?" And Vernon lights a cigarette and then breathes. And there's a red line along the bottom for the alarm. And he says to Harvey, "All you got to do is step over," which they do. And they start grabbing up the dogs one by one. And then Harvey sets off the alarm by stepping across the red line. And he does this. "I've stepped in the beam." And Vernon grabs one more puppy, which is Beethoven, and they put them in these baskets, and they bring them to the van. Harvey gets in, Vernon shuts it, and they take off down the road. And they turn the corner right before the cops get to the pet store. So they're not seen. And the puppies get put in these cages along the walls of the van. And one of the dogs, in an upper cage, is a Jack Russell Terrier. And we learn his name later. At the very end of the movie, they give him a name, so I'm going to use it for the video. His name is Sparky. And at one point, Vernon is saying, "Didn't I tell you this is easier than picking strays off the street?" And Harvey shakes him a little, like hugging him, and they hit a curb, which causes the Jack Russell Sparky's cage to fall forward, getting caught in the other cages, opens the door, and he lands on the floor. And he helps Beethoven get out. The other dogs start barking. And Vernon's like, "Why are they barking?" "They're dogs." "I know they're dogs. Go in the back and check." So Harvey goes back there and he sees them, and he tries to get the cage out of his way because it's stuck. But Sparky manages to open up the van door because it's got one of those old handles that you see on old office doors and van doors. And he opens it, and he jumps out, and Beethoven approaches it, and Harvey's like, "No, good puppy, don't jump, puppy. Bad puppy, don't jump, puppy." And Beethoven jumps. Harvey says, "Stop the van, stop the van." And he says, "Look, they're getting away." And Vernon chases after Sparky. And he's like, I'll give you a bone! I'll give you a bone! And he says, he can't catch him, obviously. He's wearing these cowboy boots that look like they were Dalmatian or cow or something, and he can't catch the dog. And Vernon walks back to the van, just so irritated. Ugh! He doesn't see Beethoven because Beethoven is hidden in a trash can. So Beethoven goes to sleep, wakes up the next morning and goes for a leisurely stroll around the neighborhood, gets hissed at by a cat, gets a leaf blower in his face, and then he sees Charles Grodin, who is George Newton. And we get introduced to the Newton family because Beethoven follows him into the house, doesn't get noticed at all, and everybody's having to get up, and Beethoven ends up in the youngest kid's room, which is Emily. And he crawls up into her bed using this little staircase of books and toys and starts licking her face. And the other kids burst in there because they're fighting with each other, of course, and the mom's trying to stop the fight, so she's following them. And she says, Mommy, I had a dream I got a puppy and it came true. And the whole family comes downstairs, minus the youngest right away. And they're telling their dad, we love you, Dad. Honey, I can't believe this. I take back every bad thing I've ever said. And he's really confused, obviously. And then the little one comes in. She's like, Daddy, can we name him Fred? And George just gets this look like that. And the kids go out and they're playing with the puppy. George is like, listen, you distract the kids, honey. I'll take the dog to the pound. And they're like, and she's like, oh, hell no. They could put it to sleep, not happening. And he's like, but honey, we can't have a dog. I didn't get the dog. They shed, they drool, they have parasites. And he goes out there, basically, his wife falls behind him, but she stays away. She stands behind him. She's like, not going to support him on this. She's like, no way. You can't show a puppy to a child and then take it away. And he starts with, guys, we're not a dog family. We're goldfish family. We're ant farm family. And the kids are like, Dad, don't you always tell us we need the responsibility and everything? We'll take care of him. And he's like, I've decided. And the disappointment on their faces and how they are very angry at their dad. And he can't stand the looks on their faces. He just can't. So he bursts out, you better think of something to name him so that when he wrecks my house, I know what to call him. And they're like, thank you, Dad, we love you. And then it skips into them trying to figure out a name for this puppy. They're picking them out of a hat, and they really can't agree. And the dad says, you could name him Ding Dong Head, and he wouldn't care. And Emily, she's sitting at the piano with the puppy, and she starts playing Beethoven's symphony. I forget exactly which number it is, but it's dun 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 dun, and we hear George go. Beethoven starts barking along to it, and George goes, Beethoven, and so we get the roll over Beethoven, ba 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 ba. And we see as Beethoven's growing up, he's becoming this large. He's getting older and older. And he's causing all sorts of havoc. Like, he pees on George's suitcase. He messes up the floor, so George is cleaning it while the kids are playing a game with Beethoven there. And he is drinking out of the fishbowl that's on top of the kitchen table. George is dragging him off with all the plates. He scratches at the door. But we do see some cool things, like some nice things, like they're teaching Beethoven to roll over. For the Halloween, they take him trick-or-treating, and Emily's a cowgirl, and Beethoven is her horse with a saddle. Even to this day, it just drives me, it's hilarious to me, because it's just so cool and so funny. So, we see more of it that happens during the music is that George comes home a lot every day, and when he does, he usually finds something wrong. Like Beethoven apparently jumped on him one day and left muddy paw prints on his suit. And another day, he comes home from a rainy day, and he comes in the house and is completely wrecked. Like, there's plants everywhere, there's mud, there's drool. He's found drool in his shoes. And he goes upstairs and he finds Beethoven on his bed, covered in mud, covered in dirt, covered in drool. and he yells, "You!" And Beethoven gets up, and he does the dog shake as George is going, "No, no, no, no!" And you see all this mud and water and drool just go all over the room. It's going all over George, and it's hitting their family picture. And we see the daily life of the kids and Beethoven, because George, he goes to work, but he puts Beethoven in a kennel pen in the back, one of the cage kennels, sorry, and he puts him out there with his along with it in his doghouse, and he leaves for work. But Beethoven, without George's knowledge, has dug a hole behind it where he can't see the hole unless he's really looking past the doghouse. And Beethoven goes under, up, and he's free. And he goes around the neighborhood, and he gets lots of food scraps just sitting around local tables. He just grabs it, eats it. He's had breakfast from Emily giving him bacon. And he runs to the bakery, and there's this lady behind the counter who sees him, waves, and he barks, and she pulls up a donut, and he takes it, but he doesn't eat it himself. He goes to this he finds this dumpster of some kind, and that dog from the beginning, that Jack Russell Terrier Sparky, is there eating out of the trash, and he gives him the donut. Like, they're friends, and he's helping him now. Rice and Ted are having troubles at school. Ted is having trouble with these three bullies, these three guys who are bullying him. Like, they pour milk on his sandwich at lunch. And Rice has this crush on this basketball player at her school. I think his name was Mark. And she wants him to notice her, but she's very insecure about that. So when Beethoven arrives at the school, she gives him a Twinkie. She's like happy to see him, and she talks to him like he's obviously a person. Like, that's Mark over there, and he's going out with the most popular girl. He's such a cool guy. He would never notice me. And so Beethoven apparently he grabs a huge stick, like it's a stick. It's really a branch, but it's a stick to Beethoven, and he brings it over to Mark, and everybody's like, "Hey, look at Fido over here. He's really cool." And he grabs the stick from Beethoven to try to throw it for him, and Beethoven drags him over to Rice, and they're like, "Hey, Rice, this is a really cool dog. Is it yours?" "Yeah." And she's just like, "Oh, he talked to me. You know, the typical teenage girl thing. Although I'm sure a bunch of teenage guys have been like that too." And Beethoven heads back home, and he snags another cookie off the table, and he's waiting for everybody to get home now, inside. And Ted is having problems on the bus from these same bullies who are throwing stuff. Like, they're throwing his backpack, they're throwing his glasses, and he barely manages to get them back at his stop, and he runs. But the bullies get off with him, and they chase him down. And he makes it to the bushes right around the corner from his house, where Beethoven can hear and see them. And these three bullies corner Ted, and they take his glasses one last time. And Ted does this, because now he's like, enough. And also, he's out of options at this point. Unbeknownst to him, Beethoven has come through the screen window. He hasn't broken it. He's pushed it up to get out of the house. And he's come around behind the bush where Ted can't see him. Ted is like this. Beethoven is behind him over here. And Beethoven looks at these kids. And these kids are like, "Whoa, what the heck?" Because he's obviously very intimidating. And Beethoven apparently in the movie shows his teeth and growls a little bit, or at least makes it seem like he growls. And the three bullies run away. And Ted says, "And don't come back!" And we see him later in the mirror in his room doing this. And Beethoven's sitting with Rice, listening to her talk to him. And George comes in and says, "Good night, sweetheart. You, out!" And he takes him outside to his pen. He opens the cage door. He's like, "You, in here. I sleep in there. You sleep here. I sleep there. You sleep." And Beethoven has just gone into his doghouse, just laid down. And George is like, "Well, thank you. That's progress. I appreciate that. Good night." George goes back inside, goes to bed, He's talking with his wife a little bit about his investment firm, about his company, about this investment idea, about her re-entering the workforce possibly. But Beethoven goes out of the pen again. He goes under the hole, comes back inside, and goes and lays on the couch, but he accidentally turns on the TV with the remote. And what we hear first is a newscast about all these pet nappings that have been happening, and then Beethoven, the channel changes again to the Wolfman, and the mom, she tells George, can you go check on it while I check on the kids? And he goes down, he turns off the TV, Beethoven isn't there, and George gets back in bed, and he starts talking as though Alice is still there, and his ear's getting licked. Like that. And he's like, it's not even my birthday. And then he sees Alice at the entrance to of his room, the door entrance, and she's like, George, who are you talking to? And George is like, ah! And he sees Beethoven, obviously. Beethoven runs out of the house, under the hole, goes into his pen again. And George is chasing him. And one of my favorite monologues of all time happens here, because it's so freaking hilarious how it ends, which is, how dare you? How dare you, crazy? Did you think you were going to get away with it? Oh, that's how you do it. I'm going to put a stop to that. You ruined my life. You've ruined my furniture. You've ruined my clothes. My family likes you more than they like me. Why? All you do is shed and eat and drool. You're never getting out of there again. Never. Do we understand each other? Do we? And then the sprinklers go off. And George is like, turns around, head back in. And we cut to a scene where Sparky is helping this homeless man collect cans to recycle. And Sparky sees another can, but it keeps getting pulled away on a string. And Vernon and Harvey catch Sparky in a net and take him to the warehouse and throw him in a cage. And we see Dr. Varnick, and he's talking with this guy who has brought him a revolver and a new type of ammunition. And he says, we need to test the effects of it at close range because it explodes on contact. And Varnick says, you want to see how messy it is. And the guy says, I assume you can get dogs with big skulls for these tests. And at first, Varnick's like, they're harder to manage, harder to get a hold of. The guy pulls out an envelope full of cash, and Varnick's like, I'm sure we'll be able to handle it. The next day, the Newton family is at the vet to give Beethoven his shots. And Varnick sees Beethoven. Obviously, he wants Beethoven for these tests. And he offers to keep Beethoven overnight. The kids say no. And he says he wants to talk to George privately. And the kids ask, Dad, are these shots going to hurt? And George is like, honey, nothing could hurt Beethoven. And then the nurse pulls out the syringe, and she does the old tap, tap. And Beethoven's eyes go like this. And he faints. He faints. So Dr. Varnick talks with George. And he's saying, listen, have you seen anything strange with your dog? St. Bernards have been overbred in the last 6 months, and I've had to put a lot of them down. And there's a problem with the breed, and what happens is they could turn on people and attack without provocation. And I'm only mentioning this because you have children. And that's a scary thought. And George tells Alice this, and she's like, he might take a bite out of you, but he'll never harm the kids. And we learned that George has secured an investment, or at least a potential investment, from these two people that he met earlier for his company. But they want to finalize it over a meal, so he offers to have a barbecue at his place. And while they're doing that, Alice has dropped off the kids with a new babysitter who is not very attentive to the kids at all. She's playing on the piano this song that she's played before. She's a singer, or was a singer, and the two older kids are with her in the room doing their homework. But Emily, the smallest, is out in the backyard by the pool playing with her bouncy ball, the big bouncy ball, and she's getting really close to the pool's edge. And we flash over to Beethoven, and he's in his cage again. But this time, George has filled up the hole with very big rocks. He can't get past that. And obviously, Beethoven senses something, because dogs have a sixth sense. We know that, especially with their family. But whether he could do that or not, sensing the kids from that far away, the danger. Emily is bouncing her ball. It falls into the pool. She's reaching for it. She can't quite reach it, and she falls in. And so she's yelling for help. Nobody can hear her. Beethoven gets out of his cage by using his muzzle, which I'm sure hurts because the muzzle is a very sensitive spot, and he pushes up the old hinge gate and pushes it up so he can get out, and he runs through these yards. And he jumps over this woman who's suntanning with headphones and sunglasses on. Obviously, she's asleep. He jumps through this hedge and puts a gigantic hole in it, doing so, and then he jumps over the fence into the pool and just saves Emily from drowning. And he gets her out, and she says, "Thank you, Beethoven, for saving me, but you better go home now. Mom said to stay in the backyard." And so Beethoven runs away before the kids see him, before the babysitter sees him, and the two older kids see Emily, and they're like, "Oh my God, Emily's in the pool!" And they run out to get her. The babysitter tries to keep Emily from talking about it, saying, "You're going to get me in trouble." Obviously, Alice Newton is absolutely furious. She fires the babysitter on the spot, takes them home, tells George, "We're not getting another babysitter, no way." And they have the barbecue. They're trying to have the barbecue, and the two investors are being very rude. They're rude to the kids who go back inside. They're out in the yard. Beethoven's on one of those long leather leads staked into the ground, and they're talking about how they're going to essentially scam Newton out of his business. And Alice and George come out, and Alice is trying to get George to read the contract, but they do things to distract her, like, "Can I have another lemonade, please?" And she takes the lemonade, swirls it in her mouth, spits it back in the cup. That was funny. The woman breaks one of her glasses by mistake, and then she also tries to distract them by bringing Beethoven over to her, saying, "I love these animals, these big, strong animals." I think she also, under her breath, said dumb. But Beethoven's getting it all tangled in the chairs and the table. And at one point, the guy who is with her, he's been squeezing this stress ball, I guess, this blue stress ball. And when Beethoven gets in his lap, puts his head in his lap, he's like, "Would you get out of here, you mutt?" and throws the ball. But Beethoven goes after the ball, which has gone into another yard. And the chairs with the two people in them go boom. They go flying. They're on for a ride. Boom. And then they're screaming. Their chairs flip over with them sitting in them, holding tight to the arms. And they land upright. And the table lands in front of them. They're shocked. Beethoven gets the ball. And then George yells, "Beethoven! Bad dog!" And Beethoven goes, "Oh!" And George is like, "No, stop, stay!" Nope. Beethoven takes off, and the two people look at each other like, "Oh!" because they're going for another ride down the sidewalk. And Beethoven goes chasing after them. "No, Beethoven!" And so that night, George is like, "I've had enough. The dog has to go." And Alice is like, "I'm proud of Beethoven. He stood up for us and gave them the ride they deserved." And George is like, my dream's going down the drain, and you're worried about a dog." And Alice says, your family's going down the drain, and you're worried about a dream." And so the next morning, the kids, all three of them, get up really early. They bathe Beethoven, they take him for a walk, they feed him, and they also make breakfast for their dad. Scrambled eggs, of course. And they're telling him, "Listen, we'll take care of Beethoven now. We'll make sure that the chores don't fall on you so much. We're going to take over most of them. And I think he believes them. But before anything else can happen, Dr. Varnick shows up at their house to see Beethoven. And he says, I make house calls for big animals for their shots. And he convinces Alice to let him into the backyard and to say Beethoven. And he makes sure that Alice can't see him or anyone else, even though Emily can see him from the upstairs window where the kids are playing on their game console. And Emily's watching him in the cage with Beethoven while he rips up his sleeve. He cuts his sleeve with a scissors, rips it up, and then puts this fake blood from a vial on his arm. He sprinkles some on Beethoven and rubs it in, and then begins to hit Beethoven in the head to get him to attack him because he wants them to give up Beethoven. Beethoven does go after him. He doesn't bite him. He does not bite him. He does growl and go after him, and then he's like, help, 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 but at the same time he's like, good boy, good boy. And George and Alice see this, and because of how things look, it looks like Beethoven is attacking him. So they go and George grabs Beethoven, she gets him out, the kids run outside, and the vet says, oh, he lunged at me, he bit me. I didn't do anything, I was petting him. And Emily says, you're a liar, I saw you, you hit Beethoven. And obviously they're not going to believe the kid first, and Varnick says he's going to take care of it himself, the wound, and he tells George outside, you have to give up the dog immediately or I have to press charges. And George is kind of distraught at this point because he sees how sad his kids are. They don't want this to happen, and they're with their mom, they're crying. George himself has a moment as he's approaching the cage with the leash where he sees Beethoven as a little puppy, but then he sees him as the dog he is now, which, quite honestly, he's very big. So he takes Beethoven, he puts him in the car, drives away. The oldest tries to catch up, but as she's shouting, wait, wait, it's just too much. She can't catch the car. And so George has his moment with Beethoven where he's like, my dad had to take my dog to the vet to get put down. I hated him for it. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. He gets there. Varnick has this cast on his arm in a sling. And he says, some people like to keep the collar. You're doing the right thing. Puts Beethoven in a cage in there. And George goes back home. And the kids won't even look at him. They won't sit with him at the table. They leave. Emily says, dog killer. While that's happening, Vernon and Harvey and Varnick are taking Beethoven out the back and putting him in the van in a cage and with a muzzle on, and they drive over to the warehouse and they force Beethoven into one of the cages, and George is ruminating. He's not happy. He's like, did I do the wrong thing? And Alice is like, something just doesn't add up. Why is Emily saying that the guy lied, especially because he's an adult? When has Emily ever said that? And so they're like, the kids are eavesdropping, of course, at the door, and so they all decide, we're going to go down to the vet, we're going to get our dog back. And they do. Varnick is there. We see him putting all this cash in a safe. And he opens the door, and they say, we want our dog back. He says it's too late, the dog's been destroyed. George says, wait, I was told this wouldn't happen until tomorrow. Rice bursts through, and Varnick grabs her by the arm. George says, what the hell do you think you're doing? Grabs him by the arm. And then he realizes, he pushes the guy's sleeve down because he's like, you're not hurt. And he's like, what the hell are you trying to pull? And they go in the back. Beethoven's not there. Varnick says, you need to leave. This is private property. Get out. I don't have to answer your questions. The dog was destroyed. George grabs him. And Varnick says, you hit me. I'll have you put in jail for assault and battery. George turns away. Varnick's like, and then boom! Varnick falls into one of the cages, and they call the police. And George is like, he said our dog bit him on the arm. There were no bite marks on his arm. What do you mean, so what? I'll file a report on you. And then Varnick, they see Varnick leave the vet office, get in his car and drive away. So they follow him in their car, turning off the lights and everything. And we see this chimney with flames coming out of it, and Vernon and Harvey are throwing these boxes in there, in the furnace. And Vernon says, okay, we have to get the dogs now. And Harvey's like, the dogs? Yeah. He said, we got to destroy all the evidence. But Varnick gets there, the families gets there, and George says, I'm going to follow him. If I'm not back in 15 minutes, call the police. Don't come in after me. And Varnick is working on these syringes by putting these chemicals in them. And Vernon and Harvey come through, and he's like, bring me the St. Bernard for the ammo test and a little one for this chemical test. And Vernon says, I know, just the one. And George climbs up the roof, to the roof, and there's this glass roof at the top where the skyline he can see down. And Vernon and Harvey go and grab the Jack Russell Terrier Sparky from his cage. They pull him out. All the dogs start barking when they see Sparky being taken away. And Beethoven starts ramming at the cage door. Like boom, boom, boom. And finally the cage itself breaks. And he gets out. And Vernon and Harvey see this. They drop Sparky and run. They just start screaming and run while Beethoven chases after them. At one point, they get behind like a table and they grab up a bunch of weapons. Like Harvey grabs a hat and a brush. Vernon does grab like some kind of a knife, a scalpel, and a cleaning container. And Beethoven easily knocks over this barricade. He starts to go after Harvey. Harvey yells, no, no, no! And then Vernon runs. And he's climbing up this ladder, and Beethoven grabs onto his foot through the boot, at those cowboy boots he's wearing, and bites him there. And Harvey gets the catch pole, loops it around Beethoven, and pulls him off, and holds him down. Varnick comes down the ladder, slides down it. And outside, Alice has started to call the police, leaving the kids in the car with it locked. And Varnick says, we're going to have a field test with this new ammo. So long. And he aims the gun at Beethoven, and then George comes falling through the skyline, and he lands on top of Harvey and Vernon, knocking them aside. Varnick is stunned, and Beethoven gets over to George, and Varnick says, you're a very foolish man, Mr. Newton. You should have left well enough alone. And he starts to point the gun again, and then we see Sparky again, who runs in and bites Varnick on the crotch. And Varnick's eyes go, oh! And the gun goes off in the air. And there's just this scuffle going on inside where the doctor's trying to get the dog off his crotch. Vernon and Harvey are fighting Beethoven and George. And at that point, Ted and the kids, they hear the gunshot. They're like, we have to get in there. And they don't wait for their mom. Ted gets in the driver's seat, turns it on, and the other kids are like, you don't even have a driver's license. We're going in. And they drive in. Alice chases after them, and they run through this warehouse door, break through it. There's a metal door up ahead, or metal doors, and they slam into it, and they knock over this table and send these syringes flying forward. Sparky has let go of the dock at this point, but Varnick's just standing there. He sees these syringes coming at him like this, and they hit him in the chest, and he lands on the wall, and he's like, he just passes out. And then the kids, George and Alice, they start to free all the other dogs from their cages. And Vernon and Harvey try to make a run for it. And the dogs chase them, Beethoven included. They chase them through these alleyways. They chase the supermarket loading bay, a supermarket loading bay where they're knocking people aside. They're knocking aside food to get away, and the dogs are chasing after them. And finally, Vernon and Harvey climb over this fence that has barbs at the top, the barbed wire, and they climb over it and fall into this junkyard. And the dogs can't get at them, but they start going, stupid, stupid doggies, stupid, stupid doggies. And Vernon's yelling at the dogs in front, behind the fence. And Harvey sees behind him, and he's like, Vernon, Vernon, Vernon. And then they turn around, and there's these 4 Doberman pinschers. Vernon and Harvey look at each other. They do this. And then the dogs charge him. And the last thing we see is them going, ah! And then it flashes to the Newton family again, watching the news about the three of them being indicted on charges of animal abuse. And how George wasn't much of a dog lover, but he is now, at least for their dog. And we learned that all the other dogs that have been freed, the majority of them are staying with the Newtons now because they start saying all their names to say goodnight. And another thing is that that boy that Rice had a crush on, he calls them after that newscast and starts talking to her and apparently wants to meet up with her. We get the roll over Beethoven one more time through the credits. And that is how the Beethoven movie went. It was made into a second. It's been made into a series basically, but in my opinion only the first and second were any good. The rest were all just comedy. Nothing really else. So Beethoven 2nd is worth a watch. This one is definitely worth a watch. So that ends my review for Beethoven, and I hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.